Hello, my name is Kevin Shabahang, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne. Here I'll present some explorations of memory for sentences I carried out with the help of Professor Simon Dennis and Dr. Hyung-Woo Kim. If we have a sentence like John loves Mary, a naive approach to encoding it would be to assume three concept nodes, John, loves, and Mary, and say that there is an association formed between loves to John and loves to Mary. The problem here is that such an encoding leaves ambiguous whether it's John who loves Mary or Mary who loves John. We call this the role binding problem. Propositional accounts resolve the role binding problem by further assuming that the associative links are labeled with roles. Hence, the association between loves to John would be labeled with the agent role, and the association between loves to Mary would be labeled with the patient role. The problem with this approach is that it requires specifying the roles a priori. Dennis showed that it's possible to resolve the role binding problem without explicitly specifying role representations. In the syntagmatic paradigmatic or SB framework, two kinds of association are assumed. One kind, syntagmatic, forms between concepts that occur in the same context. For instance, John loves and Mary would be associated if seen in a sentence. The other kind of association, paradigmatic, forms between words that appear in the same serial position across sentences with the same neighboring words. For example, if Bob and Larry preceded the word loves in previously studied sentences, they would have a paradigmatic association. Later, John would form a paradigmatic association with Bob and Larry when encoding John loves Mary. Dennis showed that it suffices to know that John is Bob-like or Larry-like when resolving the role-binding problem. Now, given that paradigmatic associations can overcome the need for role representations and are therefore more parsimonious, how can we find evidence that people form such associations? One way is to show that recall of study items is more difficult when those items have paradigmatic associations with distractors relative to when they do not. We differentially manipulated two kinds of overlap between targets and distractors in a propositional overlap by paradigmatic overlap factorial design, a 2x2. In 3 experiments conducted through Amazon's Mechanical Turk, we presented the critical sentences in a narrative. Each subject read one narrative with all 12 critical sentences and was later asked about the 4 target sentences. The plot shows the probability of correctly answering a target question as a function of the presence or absence of propositional overlap in experiment 1. The line with the empty circles corresponds to the conditions with no paradigmatic overlap, and the line with the filled circles corresponds to the conditions with paradigmatic overlap. The error bars show the 95% credible interval. Whereas there was reliable evidence for interference in the presence of propositional overlap, there was only a marginal main effect of paradigmatic overlap. In the next experiment, we fixed a possible confound between distractor sentence position in another narrative and another set of 12 critical sentences. In experiment 2, we obtained a reliable main effect of propositional interference, but no evidence for paradigmatic interference. We constructed 3 new narratives and 3 new sets of critical sentences and randomly assigned each subject to a single narrative in the next experiment. This time we got a propositional by paradigmatic interaction such that in the absence of paradigmatic overlap, we got propositional interference. However, when paradigmatic overlap was present, we have no propositional interference. Critically, we did not find evidence for paradigmatic interference. In conclusion, our experiments provide reliable support for the presence of propositional interference, but no evidence for paradigmatic interference. Thank you.